Airports were a source of considerable frustration for Tyler Bond. While he recognized their necessity for the completion of his professional duties, he nevertheless found them onerous. Moreover, he perceived a detrimental impact on his personal life, particularly on his marriage. The treatment of the thousands of individuals awaiting airlift to their destinations evoked images of cattle, prompting Bond to contemplate a re-evaluation of his perspective on the matter. He came to accept that these circumstances were simply a part of his professional landscape. 10 years ago, he was required to endure a series of inconvenient and time-consuming procedures. These included waiting in line to check in, standing in line at security before boarding the plane, and waiting in line again for people in front of him to place their luggage in the overhead compartments, all while the queue slowly moved forward. To your seat at the rear of the aircraft, you were not obliged to engage in conversation with any other passengers. As a seasoned traveler, he was no longer required to have his luggage searched by the Transportation Security Administration, TSA. His extensive experience with cross-country airlines, which involved traveling on a monthly basis, had established his position with his preferred airline, allowing him to board after first-class passengers. His credit card also provided him with access to the airport lounge in Miami, which he found to be a pleasant amenity. Nevertheless, despite the notable enhancement in the experience, he still held a negative opinion of it. An elderly woman who appeared to be many years younger than him and was dressed in a frilly dress with a plunging neckline partially hidden by a cardigan was talking to him about her recent trips. As they concluded their conversation, she handed him a business card. He glanced at the card, unable to tear his gaze away from Veronica. He then realized that she was also from Denver, which prompted a few more minutes of conversation. She had one more stop to make before returning home, which was probably for the best. After a good conversation, they dispersed to their respective gates. Was she flirting with him? Perhaps. He wished he had noticed it when they were conversing. Decades of marriage had blunted his ability to flirt. Nothing could or should have come from this. He had been completely faithful throughout his 26-year marriage. Despite his 26-year marriage, he was not inclined to alter his monogamous relationship status. He considered this to be a personal choice and a matter of personal integrity. Despite his aversion to airports, he was in a favorable mood after conversing with Veronica and experiencing some success on his trip, which would facilitate an additional bonus in the subsequent quarter. He had just boarded his airline in a larger Economy Plus seat on his return journey when his phone rang. He was prepared to switch it to airplane mode when the call was answered. His wife, Rebecca Sy, was still asleep in Denver. It was too early for her to be up and calling, given the early hour. He considered whether the call was important. It probably was. His finger lingered over the phone to answer, but he shut it off. If it was one of his children, he would answer the phone. However, whatever his wife wanted could wait. He acknowledged that their 10th anniversary trip had been difficult, despite its limitations. The year-long trip had been challenging despite its limitations. However, it was surprising that it had prompted such a lengthy debate. He was rarely absent for more than 6 nights per month. However, it seemed to have become excessive. He hoped his wife would be more understanding when he informed her about his new position and the increased salary and bonus. Years ago, his wife had strongly encouraged him to pursue opportunities outside the home. However, she had subsequently become more welcoming, despite his repeated attempts to spend more time with her. Recently, his supervisor informed him that she had become distant. He was presented with the opportunity to accept a new role that would entail more travel, which would allow him to earn even more money. However, he did not inform his wife of this offer. It would not have served any useful purpose to do so. This entire situation caused him distress, but he was fortunate to have wonderful children. He held his children in high regard, including his daughter, Jimia, who had recently commenced studies in pharmacy, and his son, Mike, who was attending summer school to gain an early start on his first year of engineering, a pursuit that mirrored his own. Understandably, both parents felt pride in their offspring. He missed their activities and the way they influenced his life. He assumed that Rebecca felt similarly, given her recent despondency. Despite their current difficulties, they had raised 2 exemplary children, who were intelligent, humorous, diligent, altruistic, and possessed a keen sense of humor. They had experienced numerous new joys over the years. He desired to visit them more frequently, now that their children had established their own residence in the vicinity. He contemplated reducing the size of the expansive mansion, but Rebecca was uninterested in the matter. In addition to her role as a hospital financial executive, she participated in numerous nonprofit boards and the local community. And neighbors reflected her image. Tyler was obliged to make a few compromises in order to maintain his wife's social position, including undertaking a greater degree of house and garden maintenance than would be required for a smaller residence. The flight was experiencing a delay, as was often the case. Alternatively, he was stuck on a long flight. He was not inclined to watch a movie and he had not slept much on the journey, so he closed his eyes for a few minutes. He was startled awake by the sound of landing. He was shocked to discover that he had slept for nearly the entire trip. He turned his phone back on and it appeared that something had exploded. All of his immediate family members had left him voicemails and messages. He called his daughter, "My God, Daddy," and expressed his gratitude for her call. Jamie, he said, had known that he was on the plane. He then asked about the current situation and expressed his frustration at not having received any calls from his family members. He told her to stop by his house. "Because it is on your route home, Mike will also be present. Jamie, you cannot leave me in this state. Are you and your brother unharmed? Is your mother well? Is anyone injured? I apologize, Daddy. The situation is dire. No one was wounded, but there are those we love who are in danger. I will explain everything when I see you." Tyler had traveled from Denver International Airport to his daughter's house near the university in record speed. He knocked on the door with haste and observed his daughter in a state of distress. He noted his son's composure as he sat in a chair. "What is the matter, baby?" "We are deeply sorry. Daddy, it's a significant disruption." Mike interjected, "It's akin to a substantial, perplexing situation." Jamie continued, "We did not anticipate this outcome. Jamie, what were you hoping to circumvent? We wanted some of this to occur, but not in this manner. Jamie, you have not yet informed me of. I have yet to receive any information regarding this matter. I kindly request that you provide me with the details as soon as possible. The incident in question occurred approximately 1 month ago, during your previous vacation to Boston. I planned to visit my mother for lunch, but upon arrival, I observed a Tesla vehicle entering your garage, which was unusual. I was unable to identify the vehicle or determine its origin from the street. However, I could discern movement within the house and observe shadows shifting, indicating that someone was approaching the garage. I initially attempted to contact my mother via her mobile phone, but she did not respond. I then waited for a few minutes before contacting her again. She finally replied. I inquired as to her whereabouts and was informed that she was still at work and would speak with me later. It was evident that her response was not truthful, so I terminated the call and continued to observe the residence. After a period of time, I relocated my vehicle out of sight and proceeded to approach the garage. The vehicle belonging to the aforementioned window mom was present, as was the Tesla. I was overcome with frustration. I returned to my vehicle, contacted Mike, and informed him of my observations. I was eager to ascertain the identity of the individual accompanying window mom. I spent the initial 6 hours awaiting his departure, consumed by rage. Mike subsequently arrived and observed until he departed at 7 o'clock. At 00 the following morning, Mike accompanied him to work in a large office building in Cherry Creek. I entered a few minutes later and inquired with the security personnel if they knew the men who had just arrived. The security personnel provided me with Mike's contact information, and Mike subsequently contacted me. We were uncertain about the best course of action. I contacted Ed, my mother, the following morning, upset that she had not responded to my call. I have been able to maintain a cordial relationship with her ever since. On your previous excursion, a similar incident occurred. Consequently, Mike and I devised a plan of action. Mike intervened when you inspected the smoke detectors a few weeks ago. Upon observing the detector in the garage, I had the notion that we found amusing at the time. However, in retrospect, I believe that sentiment is no longer applicable. We were reluctant to inform you because we anticipated your desire to apprehend them. We were reluctant to take matters into our own hands, as we feared that our actions might inadvertently or purposely result in the death of our mother and subsequent incarceration. Our intention was to create a situation that would cause them significant distress and shame. I proposed that Jamie infiltrate the garage at midnight and trigger an unexpected spark, which could potentially set off the smoke detectors. The detectors were in good working order. I anticipated that the fire department would be the first to arrive at the scene. It would seem that you were unaware that the garage was equipped with a heat detector rather than a smoke detector. Tyler stated that Mike appeared astonished, which would explain why the alarm did not activate immediately. Tyler shook his head, and Jemia interjected, "We thought that having the fire department arrive would be embarrassing, but it was not sufficient, so I kind of jumped in." Tyler appeared astonished as the implications of the information provided by the younger individuals began to emerge. He inquired about the status of my marriage and the condition of our residence. Jamie responded that, for the most part, the house seemed to be in one piece. However, on 2 occasions when I had gone to the house after my mother had left for work, one of her Magnum wine bottles had ended up in the trash. I was aware that she preferred to keep the bottle cold. Given the circumstances, it seemed an opportune moment to exacerbate their shame. It is relatively simple to obtain Viagra or a similar medication online, so I proceeded to order some. After all, I am currently pursuing a degree in pharmacy, and my background in chemistry made it relatively straightforward to transform the tablets into a liquid. Tyler interjected, "You did not." "I'm afraid I did," I replied. "I sneaked home last afternoon when I proceeded to check the wine refrigerator, where I discovered that my mother had already opened and resealed her bottle of Magnum. It became evident that the quantity was insufficient by only a cup or 2, so I proceeded to pour my mixture into the bottle, swirl it, and carefully place it back in, leaving no trace. We assumed that they would have to flee the house when the fire department arrived, as he was unable to conceal his erection, which would expose her and her lover to all. The neighbors informed me that it was Mike's turn shortly before midnight. I climbed through the garage window that I had previously opened. It took some time, but utilizing the car's charging connector and other tools, I was able to create an arc that heated the metal surrounding it. The precise nature of the issue with his car is unclear, but a sheath of sparks began to fly. I was aware that this would trigger a smoke alarm. I was under the impression that this was the case, and thus I promptly evacuated the premises. It would seem that, subsequent to my departure, the battery in question ignited. This was evidenced by the fact that, prior to the arrival of the fire department, both my own vehicle and that belonging to my mother had also caught fire. The alarm system in the house had become highly activated, and the entire neighborhood was alerted to the situation. Jamie commented, "You know how mom freaks out when she's upset. It is as if the brain has ceased functioning." This is where the narrative becomes particularly intriguing and more compelling than the details of my wife's infidelity and the burning of our house. Jamie stated that we had already informed you that the house did not burn down. In the brief time I spent with my mother this morning, she informed me that when she heard the alarm, she immediately jumped out of bed and shook her lover, Eric, but he did not awaken. Despite his apparent inebriation, she was unable to rouse him. Believing him to have perished, she contacted emergency services from her residence and loudly demanded assistance. She then proceeded to forcibly remove him from the bedroom and transport him towards the exit, seemingly unaware of their respective states of undress. Due to his considerable weight, she was unable to carry him down the stairs and instead dragged him. Once more, her lack of cognitive processing led to a series of unfortunate events. She proceeded to lay him face down, recalling the doormat nail at the entrance to your bedroom that had previously emerged from its embedded position. This occurred a few months ago when I was visiting. It now appears that either the nail was not properly hammered in or it has since become dislodged. This is because, on that occasion, I observed my mother dragging Eric, who was a considerable weight. The nail may have become dislodged due to the force exerted on it. Furthermore, the carpet nail also caught Eric, which is where his excessive consumption of Viagra and wine comes into play. The carpet nail not only cut his testicles but also cut his stomach and face because the house was dark and he was unconscious. His mother was unaware and continued to drag him down the stairs. I almost felt bad for the men. In addition to the 3, the individual in question sustained significant injuries, including a profuse bleeding wound to the groin area and extensive carpet burns from the testicles to the nose. These injuries are consistent with the hypothesis that the individual suffered a testicular rupture when he fell from the bottom step onto the tiled kitchen floor. The individuals had also likely made contact with the concrete porch and rolled down the stairs to the sidewalk, contributing to the severity of his injuries. The presence of road rash and a facial wound is also evident. A facial wound was observed on Tyler's face. He did not express any particular distress. Mike proceeded to narrate the subsequent events. It appeared that the house alarm had awakened the neighbors, as there were numerous onlookers when the mother dragged her lover, both bare asses, out of the front door in full view of the public. Timothy, who lived across the street, even recorded the scene on his phone and sent it to me. I have included a link to the video below. Tyler was unable to comprehend what he was witnessing. The video footage captured on the phone showed Rebecca pacing naked from the front of the house, while Eric's head struck the concrete as he descended the steps. Rebecca appeared to be exerting a greater degree of strength than Eric had previously observed. The ambulance and fire department arrived shortly thereafter. The crews promptly entered the house and opened the garage door, initiating the hosing down of the interior and exterior. The EMT approached his naked wife and covered her with an emergency blanket before turning Eric over. Mike informed him that he had a device in his electric car that sends an alert to his home phone whenever something unusual happens to the vehicle. It appeared that Eric's wife, Francine, received the message and noticed that her husband's car was parked at someone's house rather than at the airport, where it was supposed to be. Tyler observed that the resuscitation efforts had been unsuccessful, and that Eric was still alive but unconscious. They proceeded to secure him in the ambulance, but before they could do so, Francine appeared and forcibly removed him from the vehicle, causing him to fall backward onto the pavement. The injury required the attention of a medical professional, and it was evident that Eric would require extensive medical intervention to repair the damage to his head. It was unclear whether the situation was the result of an unfortunate accident or a deliberate act, but it was evident that Francine was enraged. She then proceeded to deliver a few solid punches to Eric's groin before they were able to free her from him. He continued to thrash around, and Rebecca stood stunned as a dozen or so neighbors, who were socially educated, witnessed the tragic comedy unfold. Francine then lunged at Rebecca, but instead of hitting her, she removed the blanket again, leaving Rebecca naked for at least a minute until another blanket could be found. Tyler then noticed his wife naked in their front yard. He thought, "I'm going to miss those breasts." However, the neighbors did not miss them or her groin landing strip. It was safe to assume that her preoccupation with her intimate areas was no longer a private matter. When the police arrived, the flames appeared to be mostly under control except for Eric's car, which was emitting sparks and smoldering. Francine, practically foaming at the mouth, yelled for the police to arrest Rebecca. The specific charge was not revealed to the public, but the officer escorted Rebecca, visibly distressed, to the rear of the patrol car to prevent her from coming into contact with Francine and the surrounding bystanders. Genia stated, "We were aware that Eric was married to Francine, but we were not aware that she was the daughter of the district attorney. It seems that she or he held sufficient influence to have her mother taken to the station and placed in an interrogation room for the remainder of the night, only wearing the aforementioned blanket. They released her at approximately 6 p.m. The time is 12 a.m. Furthermore, when she attempted to contact you, you did not respond. Some individuals hypothesize that God is an unmerciful entity." Tyler postulated that the issue was that, due to Eric's delayed awakening, a talk screen was conducted, and the sole anomalous finding was the presence of trace amounts of Viagra. Upon overhearing this information, Eric's wife expressed immense anger, citing his pre-existing heart condition and asserting that he would never engage in such an act. This is, at least, according to the medical professional's account. It was fortuitous that a fire broke out, as it permitted him to reach the hospital with sufficient haste to avert a coma. Otherwise, the consequences could have been dire. Tyler inquired about the possibility of a more unfavorable outcome. Mike interjected, and the police returned to the interview room. This morning, they visited the residence to gather pertinent evidence. However, during the fire, the firefighters discarded the bottle and glasses on the floor, shattering them along with the water bottle and wine. The residue on the floor precludes the possibility of collecting clean evidence. I entered the premises earlier and observed that the police had only identified a blood trail leading down the steps and out the door. It is my suspicion that they are merely attempting to extract information from my mother. The assumption that he took Viagra without a prescription is unfounded, yet it is being treated as fact without any tangible evidence. I would be surprised if they kept my mother in custody for much longer. Furthermore, they were able to move the Tesla out of the garage, and it is evident that my mother and Francine were both involved. The news this morning was not particularly pleasant. Tyler inquired as to the whereabouts of his mother. Genia responded that she was still in police custody. The authorities indicated that they would contact us when we could retrieve her. I expressed my profound regret. Instead of seeking retribution, we should have simply informed you of our displeasure. We exacerbated an already problematic situation while his children looked horrified. Tyler's expression gradually transformed into a smile. He stood up. He then said, "I appreciate everything you guys tried to do. I really do think that your efforts are commendable. To be frank, I don't believe you did anything to exacerbate the situation. Overall, I think things have turned out relatively well. I'm going home now. Your mother will require the attention of both of you. I'll leave it to you to decide who will pick her up from the station. It will not be me." On his way home, Tyler stopped at the bank and transferred half of their bills to a new account. In his name only, he would oversee the remaining financial matters until the following day. He proceeded to the local market and procured several garbage bags for transporting his clothes to the dry cleaners. Upon approaching the residence, he observed that the interior smelled of smoke. However, the extent of fire damage was not immediately apparent, except for a blood trail across the porch and down the stairs. He greeted me with a smile when I opened the front door. The front door was closed but unlocked. The blood trail stretched up the stairs. The area of the kitchen leading to the garage resembled a war zone. He entered the bedroom and bagged all of his clothes to take to the dry cleaners. His insurance company would receive the bill. He noticed that the bed had not been made, which saddened him for a brief moment. He then proceeded to take the necessary steps to ensure that the insurance company would be compensated for the damage. The logical first step was to initiate divorce proceedings, divide the bills, find an apartment, travel more, and use his newly available free time to spend more time with the children and have a lot more fun. He requested that Mike send him the video so that it could be distributed to local news stations. Rebecca's volunteer organizations would undoubtedly be proud to have one of their board members. He proceeded to enhance their reputation in this manner as he loaded the final bag into his vehicle. A police car arrived on the scene and requested to see some identification. This was likely due to the officer's prior presence at the scene or viewing of the video footage. One of the officers appeared embarrassed but proceeded to inquire regardless. Tyler's mind replayed the events of the day like an old wheel, crafted for use on game shows, was employed by Tyler to illustrate his mental process. At this juncture, he was reminded of Veronica's business card. His smile broadened. "I will be fine," he told the officer. "Rest assured, I will be fine." Here is the next story. I have always regarded my wife as my closest confidant. Someone dependable and trustworthy. I was taken aback when she veered off course and had to face the consequences that evening. I had anticipated a bonus, but I was skeptical that it would materialize. This was the first time in 3 years that I wore my dark blue tuxedo, and while I looked sharp, I felt out of place instead of relaxing in my favorite chair with a drink. Instead, I attended a fundraising event with colleagues and their spouses constituted a significant social gathering in our modest Midwestern town. I had requested that my wife dress up, and she did so in a manner that might have been perceived as excessive. She appeared radiant but also alluring. She was 35 years old and exuded beauty as she descended the stairs in a revealing maroon dress. The dress was of no consequence to me, she was mine, and I made it clear that I would rather be at home. My wife, however, seemed at ease mingling with the city's elite. She possessed a natural charm that drew people to her. As I returned from the bar, I noticed her conversing with Senator Thomas Norberto. My wife was often compared to Tom Selleck, and his presence seemed to captivate her like never before. This left me feeling like an outsider to her obsession. When I noticed that they were ignoring me, I stepped in to politely remind the senator of my seat. He kept chatting with my delighted wife, so I intervened. I was more assertive, placing drinks between them until he acknowledged my presence. When he finally did so, he said he would leave to find his seat, dismissing me and appearing displeased. I returned to my seat, calling him foolish, while my wife defended him, claiming that I was disrespectful to a senator. I reminded her I attempted to delineate the boundaries of our relationship, but she rolled her eyes, which I found disagreeable. I chose to avoid causing a scene by dropping the subject after dinner. The band resumed playing, and I invited my wife to dance, but she declined, disappointing me. While I spoke with others, I kept an eye on the senator, who eventually left for the veranda. I was concerned to discover him with his arm around my wife, engaged in a serious conversation. I attempted to intervene, but I was stopped. I was warned, "Don't mess with the senator, who is forcing me out. I am warning you that he is touching my wife." I gritted my teeth as I was pushed back into the ballroom. The ballroom demanded that he retrieve her. I threatened to intervene in the situation, which resulted in the senator cursing quietly and returning to my wife's side. She appeared flustered and claimed ignorance. I grabbed her hand and led her out of the ride home, which began in silence. However, I was aware that this would not last. My wife lashed out, accusing me of humiliating her. I then proceeded to defend my boundaries and remind her of the parameters of our marriage. I informed her that her actions were being possessive and that she was crossing a line. She replied, blushing, and remained silent, acknowledging my point. Our mounting tension was affecting the children, and the atmosphere at the dinner table was becoming increasingly awkward. On Wednesday, she insisted on a serious conversation is never a positive indicator. It concluded unfavorably when she disclosed her intention to attend another fundraising event with the senator, referring to it as a date. I objected to the appropriateness of this action, and she denied any wrongdoing and claimed innocence. I questioned her definition of a date, pointing out a discrepancy. As anticipated, her reaction validated my initial hypothesis. She exhibited a pattern of behavior indicating underlying issues with Angie, a woman renowned for her charismatic demeanor. She posited that a date with a United States senator is not analogous to a conventional date, emphasizing the distinction between their marital status. I reiterated the significance of this fact, emphasizing that we are married. She reminded him of their vows, stating, "You do not own me, Reggie." He countered that although they were married, she was still the mother of their children and therefore had certain rights. He pleaded with her to reconsider her actions, hoping to reach a compromise. However, she dismissed his pleas, refusing to alter her stance. I was taken aback when Hester appeared in a stunning white gown for her date. Our children were astounded, wondering why she was dressed up. She struggled to explain, but I intervened and stated the truth bluntly. As the doorbell rang, I presented her with a choice. He or we. She opened the door for a security guard, revealing a black limousine outside. She instructed her daughter to remember to behave for Daddy before departing. I assumed it was her, and I was momentarily stunned before returning my attention to my children, who needed it. Drowning your sorrows in alcohol was not an option. I arranged several video calls, one with my parents and one with Hester's. The children were delighted to converse with their grandparents. I initiated contact with Hester's parents, anticipating that her recent behavior might distress them. We engaged in cheerful discourse until Hester's absence was discovered. At this point, her mother inquired about her whereabouts, expressing concern that she might have been hidden. My in-laws joked that I should have been more aware of the situation. I softly explained that Hester was having a date with Senator Thomas Norberto and that we expected her to return the next day. My in-laws were shocked, and I was told that I should have intervened more forcefully. I tried to reason with her, emphasizing the importance of family, but she seemed to believe that her actions were acceptable. The children took over the conversation, which provided a welcome distraction. My mother-in-law encouraged communication and patience. I subsequently contacted my parents, who offered less sympathetic advice, recommending legal counsel. After a few calls, I ordered pizza, watched a Disney movie with the children, and struggled to fall asleep while distracted by ESPN. The following morning, I made pancakes and bacon, assuring the children that their mother would return soon, even if it was uncertain. There was no urgency to return home after spending the night with another man. The black limousine arrived at our residence at approximately 10 p.m. The children and neighbors were drawn to the scene, as they would typically rush to greet their mother. However, on this occasion, they remained stationary. I was disheartened by her lackluster appearance. She was still wearing the same dress from the night before. I sat in the living room, wrinkled and tired, as she entered with no eagerness to greet her. She simply said, "Hello," and proceeded to acknowledge our night apart. The children appeared to have coped adequately without me. I responded in a somewhat abrupt manner, and she proceeded upstairs to seek rest and a shower. I raised my hands in a gesture of apparent acquiescence, acknowledging the end of our relationship. I concentrated on providing a more supportive environment for my children, striving to avoid becoming a mere weekend presence in their lives. The question lingered in my mind, could I remain until they completed their high school education? Hester finally arrived downstairs at 10 o'clock p.m. I had already prepared dinner and suggested that there were leftovers in the fridge, but she only gave a faint smile in response. The children sensed the tension between us and maintained their distance. Hester accused me of poisoning their minds, but I denied it, emphasizing the consequences of her actions for them and our neighbors. I did not break up our family, she was the one who had initiated the conflict. She then shifted the blame to me, stating that it was up to me to work on my ego issues so that our family could heal and stay together. However, she warned me that if I continued to be petty and nasty, we would have to part ways. She also suggested that I could become a part. The time of day was 1 p.m. when she issued her warning. I had anticipated that I would regret not resisting and expressing anger. "You idiot," I replied. "You couldn't get enough last night." She paused, avoiding my gaze. "We can get past this and return to the way things were," she said. "I know I hurt you, and I apologize. However, I required this for my own benefit, and I do not regret it," she stated unapologetically. "That is an inadequate apology, if indeed it was an apology at all." I countered, "You are only sorry for hurting me, not for anything else." She responded defensively, "It was fantastic for you." My response reflected her conviction that I had betrayed our vows. Furthermore, I elucidated how astonished she was when I discovered her in our guest bedroom. "It is imperative that we proceed with caution and consideration," she implored. "We cannot move forward unless you attempt to do so." However, I firmly asserted that it was too late, and I proceeded to lock her out of the room. That night, I slept soundly, fatigued from 48 hours of mounting tension. The following morning, I resumed our discussion. On Sunday, the family observed the tradition of having brunch by preparing Belgian waffles. It appeared that the mother had not slept well. Elise observed as we sat down to eat. She suggested that the mother should get out more on Friday nights. The mother burst into tears and fled to the bedroom, perplexing the children. "Did I say something wrong?" Elise innocently inquired. "No, sweetie. I believe your mother simply missed the waffles." I reassured her softly later on as I sat in my lazy boy watching the Cubs game. The bedroom door suddenly opened, and a frantic Hester stormed in, ranting incoherently. "Calm down, honey. I cannot understand you with all the drooling and spitting," I said. She began to sob. She then accused me of making her appear promiscuous to her parents. "What's a Kardashian, mommy?" Ellis inquired upon entering the scene. I exchanged a glance with Hester, who had composed herself and sent the children to their rooms before confronting me. "Tell me," she insisted, she said, as soon as the children were out. "From my perspective, there was no reason to conceal this information from your parents, given that you were merely accompanying a senator to a fundraising event." I proceeded to clarify that if they concur with my assessment that this incident is not my responsibility, I would appreciate it if you exercised caution in the future, particularly when your mother is in proximity. I must note, however, that this is not a cause for concern. She began and then abruptly ceased, creating an astonishing experience. I interjected, stating that if appearances could kill, I would be a stain on the chair, but that it did not trouble me greatly. I motioned for her to move so that I could see the television, and then she hastily departed the room. For the following 2 weeks, I slept in the guest room. Upon noticing this, I informed the children that I had a cold and did not want their mother to catch it. I assumed that Eliza had discerned my deception, but she wisely kept it to herself and said nothing. The child demonstrated remarkable intelligence one evening. The following night, I observed the child going upstairs at an hour when I was asleep. I returned to our shared bed and climbed in gently. When the alarm rang the next morning, the child curled up next to me. She expressed her feelings verbally and attempted to touch me. I physically prevented her from doing so by placing my hand on her forearm and pulling her hand away. I then shifted our position on the bed so that we were facing each other. I believe that certain acts are best performed with direct eye contact before I decide to sleep with the child again. It is imperative that you undergo a medical examination and provide me with the results. I spoke in a soft voice, suggesting that you might be willing to trust Senator, but I am not. Tears filled her eyes, and it seemed as though she was about to say something, but then she chose not to. Instead, she just nodded, which revealed to me that she and the senator did not use protection. The scenario is becoming increasingly intriguing. Originally, I intended to stay until the children completed high school. Nate had to wait approximately 14 years before he could attend college. My love for them made me willing to persevere, but the prospect of long-term closeness and absence, particularly with an attractive woman living under the same roof, appeared untenable despite my concerns about my reputation. My feelings for her had faded over the previous 2 weeks. The long-term proximity and absence, particularly with an attractive woman residing in the same domicile, appeared to be an untenable arrangement despite my concerns about my reputation. My feelings for her had diminished over the previous 2 weeks, witnessing her departure from the bed with sadness. My own distress prevented me from providing solace. Who is she today? The woman I married would have understood my displeasure at her seeing someone else. Hester and I met her at college, we began dating 3 months later, and married within 2 years. She worked as an actuary, a job that required precision and honesty while also balancing my spontaneity and sense of humor. Despite our differences, I imagined celebrating 50 years of marriage. Senator Thomas Norberto unexpectedly came into our lives 10 days after returning to our shared bed. Hester handed me an envelope as I came home from work. Inside was her clear bill of health. The document was a bill of health. She inquired as to whether he was satisfied. She stated that he had no idea how humiliating this was. She then asked if he would ever see Dr. Sanjay again. He replied that it was not his fault. She then asked him to stay faithful, stating that he would not be embarrassed. She was unable to respond further as she walked away. He then asked her how often the senator had contacted her. She began to answer, but he silenced her with a gesture and a grimace. She then handed over her phone. He found texts and calls from the senator, but no evidence. I then inquired about the possibility of further meetings, to which she replied in the negative. However, I was unconvinced. We were teetering on the brink of disaster. That night, she demonstrated her affection in bed, and I was overcome with desire. I was aware that she was attempting to rekindle our relationship, but I was preoccupied with other matters. Hester's sudden return home prompted speculation and gossip in the neighborhood. Men offered her sympathetic looks, and women smirked. Rumors began to circulate. Eliza approached me inquiring about a women's club. I maintained my composure, elucidating the misstep of my mother and reassuring her. I embraced her, concealing my emotions, cognizant that this encounter would forever haunt me. A sense of normalcy gradually returned to our household, at least as far as I could discern. Nevertheless, it was a different kind of normalcy. Whether she had acknowledged it or not, the circumstances would never revert to how they were before that day. I could not fully trust her again. Furthermore, I was unable to forgive or forget the profound disrespect she had shown me and our family. To quote Tina Turner, "What does love have to do with any of this?" 6 months later, he seemed to grasp something or find the courage to speak up following that evening which she instigated. I turned away from her to sleep as had become customary since then. Before she said anything, I could hear her crying. Reggie, can we talk?" she asked meekly. I replied, "Of course." I then inquired, "Could you please turn around?" Her tone was clearly irritated. I observed that her tone was again attempting to disguise her annoyance. I then turned to meet her gaze. She kept looking at my eyes. "Do you realize how long it's been since we were together? Just say it." I did say it. I insisted that you had the courage to do it and be brave enough to admit it. "We haven't been close since I went on a date." I then observed that she explained, "You physically please." I then went to sleep. "You ensure my happiness, but it all feels very physical. You haven't hugged me since, I miss having that intimacy." I answered, "You can't even say those words, baby. You're on a date. You cheated on me with him. Accept it. I am not a stupid person. You leave on a date and don't return until the next day. You make it look cheap and filthy." She objected, "Yes, we had a terrific time making love on Saturday night. He was nice and caring, like you. The experience was indeed unforgettable, which is why we have ceased sexual intercourse. You should be aware that you provided him with something that, as you had promised, was entirely mine, and you enjoyed every aspect of it. As you stated, it was memorable, but it only lasted a single night. In statistical terms, this is insignificant when compared to the hundreds of days we will spend married. If you are willing to try again," she was. I appreciate the mathematical analogy, but I have never viewed our marriage as a mathematical problem. Would you feel the same if I did it with Mary Jo Young? Mary Jo Young, a divorced blonde with a lovely physique, lives nearby. Almost every lady on our street pays great attention to her and her husband. Are you suggesting that you want Mary Jo? No way, she replied. Listen to your inner self. I never stated that I desired Mary Jo. That is you. I was curious. I inquired as to how she would respond if I were to do so. She initially appeared perplexed, but then her expression turned hostile. I am able to discern meanings between the lines. Verbal communication is not necessary. I stated, in a self-assured manner, that she attempted to avoid making eye contact. Do you comprehend that as a result of these events, the other girls in the neighborhood bullied Eliza? They overheard their mothers making disparaging remarks about you, and the situation was unpleasant. I informed her that her outburst turned to disbelief. Upon hearing the news, Eliza never mentioned it. She took a deep breath and processed the information. I apologize for my actions. The word sorry is insufficient. You refer to the night as unforgettable. It was an unforgettable experience, but I declared betrayal with that statement. I turned away and went to bed, not knowing what her next move would be. Hester deserves credit for her actions over the next few months. She set out to be an amazing mother. Traditionally, I had been the primary caregiver for our children. However, Hester suddenly assumed a greater share of the chores, transporting the children to their various activities and providing them with a supportive presence. This prompted me to consider whether she had finally recognized the importance of prioritizing our family over her own desires, a shift that could potentially maintain our family's cohesion. The children appeared to appreciate the additional attention, but my daughter once again demonstrated her exceptional perceptiveness, beyond her 8 years of age. She said to me one day, "I hope she receives a proper apology for what she did wrong." I attempted to answer with a genuine smile, recognizing her strong awareness of her surroundings. Everything appeared to be normal in the Wilkerson family. I worked hard to maintain appearances. Hester, on the other hand, seems eager to go to great lengths, not merely to maintain appearances but also to reclaim my favor. We were two people sharing a roof. Despite her strong desire for normality, she was able to enjoy certain benefits as a result of her actions. She had long expected me to renounce my feelings for her, but I was unable to do so. After 9 years of her being the focal point of my life, she had made things more challenging for herself by communicating with Senator Patrick. I immediately reviewed her phone calls and messages following their date. She had checked to ensure that they were clear, but she was unaware of how simple it would be to do so. It was relatively simple to clone a phone and gain access to all of the communications. Despite her attempts to maintain a certain distance, he seemed to stay in regular contact. Could we arrange another meeting soon? I will be in town. He sent a text message nearly a month ago, indicating that my husband was still upset from the last time she said, "I'm not willing to take the risk." Needless to say, I was unimpressed. A month later, we celebrated our 10th anniversary with a trip to Chuck E. The children appeared to enjoy themselves, but Hester did not. She only voiced her displeasure with me after the children had finished playing games. We have always celebrated our anniversaries together on a special night. Your actions are unconventional because you still harbor a grudge. When did you become so? She reiterated that the response to the question was similarly trivial to many others concerning the nature of the relationship. I responded that she needed to move on from this, and inquired about the frequency of communication between the two of them. She responded with a smirk before going into. She then removed her phone from her pocket and handed it to me. I threw it high into the air and caught it as it descended. I acknowledged her disloyalty but also respected her intelligence. I doubt that there is any evidence of her affair on that phone. In fact, there are no records of such activity since I confiscated it the first time. Previous texts and phone calls that you may not have initiated, but I have never heard you directly reject the individual. Therefore, I am perplexed as to why that is the case. She turned aside, her cheeks reddening. I was aware that that was a rhetorical question. Despite the upheaval my profession and children provided, I was able to find stability in my marriage. It was often observed by colleagues that I appeared to require a considerable amount of sleep, potentially up to 6 hours. I was concerned that I might be developing an ulcer due to my excessive alcohol consumption and difficulty sleeping. There were occasions when I remained awake for extended periods, contemplating my situation. Despite my wife's continued affection, I sensed a shift in our relationship. She justified her actions as distinct from our usual dynamic, citing her night out with Senator Prick as an example. She displayed no remorse for her behavior. My primary concern is the emotional distress she has caused me. I anticipated further challenges, but surprisingly, my mother-in-law became a source of strength during this challenging period. She frequently expressed regret for her daughter's actions. "Reggie, we apologize, we did not raise her to be this selfish. However, we sincerely hope you can find a way to move on." During one of her calls to check on me, she stated, "I know what you're doing for the kids." As I walked to the kitchen, I grabbed another cooler of beer to take with me. We were having our typical monthly summer picnic in the neighborhood outside. 2 barbecues were cooking with a variety of hot and cold dishes, fruits, desserts, and beverages. The weather was perfect, sunny, and 80 degrees Fahrenheit with little breeze. The gathering had begun a few hours earlier and was scheduled to last another 5 or 6. These meetings were always enjoyed by both children and adults. As I proceeded through the house, I heard female voices coming from our home office, which is generally off limits to none. I intended to direct the family to the family room or living room, where the majority of the activity was occurring. Several individuals sought refuge within the aforementioned rooms for the purpose of accessing air conditioning or engaging in tranquil conversations. However, this particular space presented a dilemma. When Reggie assumed a leadership role, I was compelled to consider his characteristics. He is characterized by a commanding presence, determination, and a singular focus on his objectives. On occasion, I am unable to erase the memories of that particular night. It is a memory that I will retain forever. Hester informed her. As I approached the room, I found myself unable to proceed further. My legs became weak and I was on the verge of losing my balance. I was uncertain as to the number of individuals who were aware of my betrayal. I heard laughter, and it seemed as though there were 3 individuals present. I was unable to remain for the remainder of the conversation as I was overcome with the urge to vomit. I was relieved to reach the restroom before I was ill, and I proceeded to empty the contents of my stomach. After cleaning up, I took the beer cooler. I proceeded to the exterior of the premises and provided 2 bottles to the individuals engaged in the grilling activities. I inquired as to their well-being, noting that they appeared somewhat peculiar. I observed John, who seemed to be casually concerned. I responded, and then gradually lost consciousness. I remained silent for the remainder of the meeting, during which time Hester and her companions returned. I sensed that I was being observed, and saw smirks directed at me. I wondered if I was becoming unhinged, but it seemed as though practically every woman in the BP line was sneering at me. Later that night, after putting the children to bed and cleaning up, I informed my wife of my unease. She was seated on a lounge chair, drinking a wine cooler, and appeared relaxed. I accompanied her, and I inquired if someone had arrived that day who was unaware of the affair. She seemed taken aback. I returned her gaze, appearing innocent. I may have mentioned it to a few girlfriends recently. It was a memorable experience. She laughed, calling him nice. Senator, I was compelled to divulge the information, as I felt it was important for you to be aware of the circumstances. You initiated the affair and then proceeded to shame me in front of your friends. You informed every husband of your infidelity and painted me as a betrayed victim, accusing me of being unfaithful. She responded with indignation, stating that it was only a single instance of indiscretion and that I should not be labeled as such. She then stood up from her chair at Shay's lounge, her eyes reflecting a hint of defiance. I have reached my limit. She then declared, her voice becoming louder, that he had been engaged in a pattern of deceit for over a year. She revealed that her husband had been unfaithful to her with another woman, whom she described as attractive and muscular. She then stated that it was time for him to move on and cease holding her hostage with his insecurities. She asserted that she would no longer be held responsible for his actions and that he needed to either file for divorce or accept the reality of the situation. She then informed him that she was tired of living a lie with him, attempting to maintain an image of perfection in their marriage. Her outburst caught him off guard. I sat in stunned silence for what seemed like hours. She had already departed, leaving me alone despite my recent recovery from unconsciousness. I am naturally reserved and slow to react, a quality that some, including my wife, perceive as a weakness. I rarely experience panic or act hastily. The prospect of not seeing my children daily is distressing, yet I remain optimistic about the possibility of salvaging our family. I had prepared myself for the worst, with a lawyer prepared to represent me in legal proceedings. I was informed that Hester had been served with divorce papers at her place of employment on Monday morning. Understandably, she was displeased. Approximately 5 minutes after being served, my phone began to buzz incessantly, and I ignored all of her calls. When I returned home, I awaited the impending storm. Hester entered the home from the garage in a state of agitation, proclaiming, "You foolish man, your fragile male ego has been damaged, and you have humiliated me in front of my colleagues. As you have already demonstrated, workers, your actions have caused us embarrassment in the presence of our friends and neighbors." In response, I informed her that she had almost begged me to file for divorce, and so I did. She gave me a mocking glance but remained silent, setting down my belongings. I then addressed my children for a brief conversation, reassuring them of my unwavering love despite the fact that we no longer shared a residence. A house, Elise was able to comprehend the issue and began to establish connections with divorced parents the following day. However, Nate appeared perplexed. I was aware that he would face challenges, but I was confident that my daughter would provide assistance. The divorce procedure appeared straightforward due to the state's no-fault legislation. She was anticipating obtaining primary custody of the children, the house, child support, and some alimony was awarded, but she strenuously objected. Her lawyer employed a variety of strategies to extend the proceedings for reasons that remain unclear, including insisting on meetings and even offering marital counseling. This raises the question of whether the actions of the parties involved have been more influential than their words. The individual in question claims to love the other, yet has caused significant distress. This is followed by an act of audacity. To proclaim to one's acquaintances that one's spouse is the most exceptional individual one has ever encountered is a bold assertion. It is therefore unsurprising that one would choose to terminate a marriage in which one's partner displays consistent irritability. While one may love one's children, if one remains in a relationship with an angry father who lashes out in a single outburst, they will likely only remember that father as an irate figure. One's love for another is not contingent on a single incident. While one's partner may have been exceptional in certain respects, this incident was isolated and does not negate the need for a more comprehensive assessment of the relationship. A temporal discrepancy has occurred. "Please excuse me," she implored. "I cannot." I replied, "You have breached our vows and dismissed their significance. This is something I cannot overlook. You promised me promises. I had not intended to do this. I had not intended to do this, but everyone has a breaking point. The beauty of a two-party political system is its contrast. Regardless of how one may spin it, Senator Prick belonged to one side. This meant that the opposite party would welcome anything that harmed his reputation from over a year ago following Hester's infidelity. I prepared a backup plan and enlisted the assistance of a well-connected lawyer in our city. I approached the chairman of the opposition political party, who was looking for anything that could jeopardize the senator's chances of re-election and White House ambitions. Despite the substantial monetary prize, they eagerly awaited the news. He agreed that the evidence would only be divulged if the possessor requested it every month. My lawyer kept a lawyer with connections in our city was retained to approach the chairman of the opposition political party, who was seeking any information that could potentially harm the senator's chances of re-election and White House ambitions. Despite the substantial monetary prize, the chairman was eager to proceed. The agreement stipulated that the evidence would only be divulged if the possessor requested it each month. My lawyer kept I was informed of the chairman's persistent requests this month. We were prepared to meet the chairman's requests. The meeting took place. My first participation occurred in my attorney's office after introductions. I removed a sealed plastic bag from my briefcase and set it on the conference table. When the chairman saw the bag, his amazement was evident. He mumbled, "Dear God. Is that what I believe it is?" "If you believe it is proof that could end Senator Briggs' career," I responded. They then proceeded to examine the bag as if it contained rare gold bars. He avoided touching it, instead continuing to stare in awe. That night, my partner returned home and proceeded to take a shower. I recalled that she presumably figured that because I do the laundry, I wouldn't go. I then proceeded to wait until I heard the water run before entering the bathroom and discovering the underpants at the bottom of the hamper. It is likely that most people are familiar with DNA from television. I am convinced that when you test these, you will discover two unique sets. Here is her toothbrush for DNA comparison. I am assuming you will get the senator's sample for matching, unless I already have one. I stated, adopting a stern expression. The chairman's complexion immediately assumed a crimson hue, and he averted his gaze. As I had anticipated, he demonstrated an acute comprehension of the intricacies of the case, obviating the necessity for further elaboration. Nevertheless, I discerned an unarticulated query lurking in his countenance. The question, I surmised, pertained to the rationale behind my assertion that she lacked the intellectual capacity to comprehend the implications of her actions and, consequently, the necessity to refrain from crossing me. Despite her deceit, I acknowledged a certain degree of naivete in her actions. She is arrogant in her belief that I will eventually forgive her. She is displaying this belief in front of me, and I have no interest in entertaining it. In the situation she works in, I announced to Thomas that his career is over. I also informed him that he should be ashamed of himself. I then asked Norberto, "How could your weak spouse obtain proof of our weekend together?" I had assumed that he was aware of the situation, but there was evidence that he was not. 1 week after my discussion with the chairman, Norberto yelled at Hester. I am uncertain as to the exact nature of the conversation that took place over the telephone. I was taken aback by her hesitation, and the call itself came as a surprise. I had previously replicated her actions, and thus essentially disclosed to her that I had tapped her telephone a few months ago. This meant that, if at all, she was unaware of the fact that she had been communicating with someone else. She then asked me when I would return her call. I did not respond for approximately 90 minutes. I comprehended her meaning, yet I felt indignant. I had just ordered a pepperoni pizza with garlic bread. Why should I be concerned about what I consume? How did she ascertain what I had ordered? She verbally attacked me. Based on previous interactions, I could discern that she disdained my foolish behavior, although she may have regarded me as she had a superior notion. I surmised that being correct about 1 out of 2 things was not an egregious misstep. I am uncertain how you accomplished this, but it appears that you retaliated against Senator Norberto in some manner. However, he threatened to physically assault me for your actions. He refused to divulge the specifics. On a related note, my parents I am also enraged. Elise has been avoiding me, and it is evident that you are unable to grasp the distinction between the actions of Thomas and myself and the state of our relationship. With regard to Senator Norberto, who seemed determined to retain his position, he abruptly withdrew from the Senate contest 8 months before the election, citing despite the plethora of other issues in my life, the overwhelming concern of my mental fatigue was such that seeking female companionship was the least of my problems. It had been months since I had looked at a woman in a particularly enticing way until my daughter brought up the topic. "Daddy, when do you intend to start seeing other women?" Elise inquired in a nonchalant manner. During the second weekend, my children joined me. Linda's mother expressed interest in pursuing a relationship with me. I was astonished, as I had not considered the possibility of a romantic interest from Linda's mother. Divorce has left me uncertain about my future. I had not given any attention to my future other than taking care of my children. Linda's mother brought up the topic of a relationship every other weekend. Over the course of the weekend and for several weeks during the summer, would you be amenable to that arrangement? I inquired, somewhat taken aback. "Well, Dad," she replied, "she didn't explicitly tell me, but Elise admitted that she overheard her conversation with Annie's mother. I would be okay with that, but I don't want you to be alone, Dad. I don't want you to be with Marcy's mom, either. None of us children." He was pleased to note that she had a fondness for her children. It was evident that she had been divorced from her husband for nearly 5 years. He observed that she was a charming and energetic blonde with a curvaceous figure who exuded the enthusiastic demeanor she had displayed during her days as a cheerleader. He had never considered that she might be interested in him. When one is married, it is not typical to consider such matters. One must consider the prospects of other women. At least I did not. Was I being naive? Elise was calmly observing me. "It is okay, Dad. I am nearly 9. I understand about the divorce. Nate and I will be okay. Take care of yourself." It seemed like I was back in the dating scene. Linda's mother, Julie, was my first date after I began to engage in the process of dating, which initially seemed agreeable, although somewhat obligatory. I informed her that, despite my recent return to the dating scene, I was not emotionally prepared for a serious relationship. She responded with a reassuring smile, suggesting that I lacked an explanation for the expectations of those I dated. Julie provided insightful counsel, akin to a crash course on navigating life's complexities. Given that my children's friends included other children of divorced parents, she suggested that I might attract the attention of other divorced mothers. I was already regarded as a kind father with a successful career, and she blushed slightly when she mentioned my attractiveness. I then began dating Julie and a couple of other divorced mothers. Occasionally, I thought of my ex-wife, but not frequently. I did not consider reconciling with my wife Hester or our previous marriage. Despite acknowledging feelings of loneliness, I did not believe that these feelings were sufficient justification for reuniting with her. I was unwilling to accept the possibility of her deceiving me again. In contrast, Hester rapidly dismissed her affair as a dumb mistake, vowing never to repeat it. I responded with skepticism, characterizing it as a dumb mistake. I viewed it as a manifestation of poor judgment, a lack of respect, and ultimately, selfishness. She had chosen an affair with the senator over the well-being of her family. Her mouth opened and closed twice. Twice I sensed her urge to respond, but she remained silent. I anticipated that she would persist despite the lack of justification for her actions, particularly given the futility of contacting the senator. My ex-mother-in-law during a visit on a Saturday, the mother-in-law informed me that her son had implored her to refrain from contacting him. She seemed to believe that I played a role in his decision to withdraw from the Senate race and that she had not intervened sufficiently. She proceeded to recount the incident, and I raised an eyebrow before continuing to eat silently without comment. Several months later, some colleagues the workers proposed going to a new, upscale bar with a dance floor. When I was married, I avoided Thursday evening gatherings like the plague. However, now that I am single, I find myself going out frequently. 4 of us got a table, ordered drinks, and enjoyed the environment. I observed the 2 women as soon as they entered. The first woman appeared to be in her early 40s, but she dressed more like someone over 30. Intending to convey a youthful appearance, she wore a blue silk shirt that was slightly unbuttoned and a short skirt to highlight her long, toned legs, short dark brown hair, and green eyes. She exuded confidence. In contrast, her companion seemed ill at ease in the pub setting. She is slightly older than her partner, possibly in her early 40s, and radiates sophistication and affluence. She sat at a nearby table, dressed in the ensemble of sweater and skirt that exuded elegance and beauty was worn by a woman with shoulder-length silver blonde hair and dark eyes. Males anxious to engage or dance with the women quickly became aware of their presence. I was compelled to dance with one of them, particularly the woman with dark hair. The woman with dark hair appeared to be amenable to social interaction, readily accepting dance invitations from multiple men. In contrast, the woman with blonde hair danced with less frequency and exhibited a more reserved demeanor in her movements. An hour later, I decided to request a dance with the blonde woman. However, as I approached her table, the woman with dark hair she grasped my hand and led me to the dance floor. I was wholly captivated by her and forgot about her companion. We danced to upbeat music until the tempo slowed. She kissed me passionately, and I was enthralled. We left the club together and proceeded to my apartment. Our enthusiasm spilled over into the bedroom, where she revealed details about her personal history. It transpired that she and her partner were marking the end of their marriage. Rosie was an excellent sexual partner, and we were together for approximately a month before she indicated a reluctance to commit so soon after the dissolution of her marriage. I respected her perspective and we parted ways amicably. At the initial encounter, I was unable to ascertain the nature of her acquaintance, which subsequently piqued my curiosity. Several weeks later, I found myself at a bar at another prestigious establishment, seeking solace with a drink. It was not my turn to care for the children. After a demanding week, I had the weekend to myself. She entered the room alone, attracting the attention of all present. Her form resembled that of Megan from Stallion, with a waterfall of thick brown locks framing her face and cascading over her shoulders. She walked over in 4-inch stiletto heels and settled down next to me. I instantly felt as if I had stepped into heaven. I attempted to initiate conversation with a polite opening line, but before I could utter a word, she looked into my eyes and inquired about my drink order. I responded with a playful smile, feeling envious of her composure as my thoughts scattered. She ordered an excellent selection of drinks, speaking in a manner that suggested a man with great taste. I decided to order the same undiluted drink that I had previously consumed. She proceeded to the evening was spent discussing the boutique marketing company she had established several years prior. It was remarkable that she was not merely intriguing and intellectual, she also demonstrated success in business. Subsequently, we proceeded to her residence. She stated that she prefers to engage in sexual intercourse in her own bed, a sentiment that is frequently expressed by women. We investigated the psychological rationale behind this preference, with her well-toned body serving as a point of reference. I was astonished to learn that she was 45 years of age. Our initial encounter was marked by a lack of civility. She was an excellent kisser, and I felt a connection with her that I had not experienced since my date with Hester Maria Washington. In the course of one evening, Maria revealed more about herself than Hester had in the span of our 9-year marriage. Despite being married for a number of years, Maria revealed that she was dedicated to her profession and had no desire for children. She expressed a preference for casual encounters with numerous men instead. Despite developing a genuine affection for her, I was aware that a conventional relationship was not a viable option. Consequently, I agreed to a friendship with benefits for the following year. We had monthly meetings until Maria unexpectedly fell in love with a much younger man. Despite the divorce, the law would occasionally telephone me. We remained closely connected, united by our mutual understanding and grandchildren. I continued to refer to them as Mom and Dad. "Ray, might I inquire as to whether I could be of service?" she asked, her tone carefully measured. I assured her that it would be a kindness to accept my mother-in-law. Law's request to bring her personal assistant to their impending company holiday party is understandable. She is a good-hearted person who was divorced a few years ago from an abusive cheater. It seems unlikely that she has dated anyone since, given the damage that she suffered at the hands of Reggie. She needs a decent person to show her that not all men are bad. "I believe you are a decent man, my former mother-in-law." My in-law explained that it is peculiar when your former mother-in-law attempts to set you up on a date. I added, "Please assure me she is not dull." Mom chuckled as she recognized the humor. "I believe you will be pleased. Reggie, you might even allow us to keep the kids for a night or two." She was teasing. Mom was correct. I was happily surprised. Cheryl, or Cherry Lean, as she preferred, was a lovely bundle of charm with her proportions were well balanced, and she exuded a warmth that was not excessive, yet she had a distinctive ability to wrinkle her nose and squint her green eyes when she was laughing. Her personality was genuinely admirable. I made a conscious effort to maintain proximity to Cheryl and to devote my undivided attention to her throughout the evening, in a manner similar to how I would have treated my former spouse. My wife, Cherilyn, seemed to appreciate the gesture. While conversing, she tended to defer to others, which is logical given her upbringing. My in-laws and I sat at a table together. My mother was as graceful as ever, although my father was more reserved. Initially, I understood his demeanor, but as the evening proceeded, he became more open. I surprised Jerry with my dancing skills, which I had refined to please my ex-partner. Wife Hester, who enjoys dancing, demonstrated expertise, particularly in quicker dances. Cheryl also displayed proficiency in these types of dances and provided compliments in slow dances as if we had been dancing together for years. As I escorted Cheryl through the door, I experienced a sensation of her body against mine. She kissed me gently on the lips and offered me her phone number. I realized I needed to prioritize my interactions with my in-laws. After 3 days, I contacted Cherilyn to request a date. She consented to meet the following Friday at one of the city's most esteemed Italian restaurants, followed by an art exhibition at a local gallery. Cherilyn selected a more revealing ensemble for our date than she had at the Christmas party, which I found particularly noteworthy. We had an excellent time and went out 3 more times before I decided it was time for her to meet my 8-year-old child. A year my daughter and I met her daughter, and we spent some quality time together playing mini-golf and having a picnic at a local park. Overall, I thought it went well, especially because the 2 girls formed a deep bond. However, as I had predicted, my child was dissatisfied because he thought all girls had cooties. Sherry and I met several times each week, and after I had my children, we did family activities together. All 5 of us were doing well until a few weeks into the new school year, when I received an unexpected phone call from Hester. "I am not sure what your girlfriend has been. I was teaching my children, but your son was in the principal's office today for fighting and his face is battered up. He has been suspended for 3 days, and he believes that it all started with this Monique girl. He continues to phone his sister, who became enraged over the phone first and foremost. It would be inappropriate for me to use such derogatory language in reference to my girlfriend. I will come over after supper to take Nate out for ice cream. It would be prudent to refrain from jumping to conclusions until we are in possession of the facts. I responded in a calm and collected manner. I heard her sigh before hanging up. After dinner, I collected Nate and drove him to a small family-owned ice cream shop. Upon entering the vehicle, I immediately conducted a comprehensive visual assessment of the individual in question. I observed a laceration on the left side of his mouth and a scratch on his cheek. In response to this observation, the subject, identified as Nathan Abraham, inquired about the truth. I provided his full name, emphasizing the seriousness of the situation. The subject exhibited discomfort when he heard his first and middle names. I then informed him that a younger individual was harassing my sister. In response, the subject became aggressive and began to verbally attack me. The initial assault was followed by a more forceful attack. It is reported that I broke his nose, which resulted in a pronounced cracking sound and extensive bleeding. He attempted to conceal his smile as he recounted the incident. The aggressor, who had been bothering M.O., was 2 years older than Nate. I inquired whether M.O. would share the same account. He replied that he would not have struck the other boy if he had not initiated the confrontation. I typically encourage M.O. to prioritize allies' safety, so Nate assumed it also referred to M.O. He added that she is very small. Nate has a valid point. Monique inherited her mother's tiny stature, putting her at least half a head shorter than the majority of her friends. I had always emphasized to Nate the need to watch out for his sister. It appeared that he now saw Monique as a member of his family. It was fascinating to see how the purity of youth trumped. I commend you for protecting M.O., but I ask that you keep this between ourselves. I assured him that I would speak with the principal and see what could be done. You may wish to inform your mother about Mo's current situation. It appears that you and Elise have not been keeping her up to date on my life, which I appreciate. I stated that it could be better, and I would appreciate it if you would convey this to her. The 7-year-old comprehended the situation entirely. Children mature rapidly nowadays. When are you and Sherry planning to get married? She's fantastic, he added. I had already stated that children mature rapidly, and he was correct. It was time to make a commitment to the woman. The next day, I contacted the principal. Fighting was strictly prohibited at the school, even if it was done in self-defense. However, they had a zero-tolerance policy regarding following witness interviews. The aggressor received a 6-day suspension despite my disagreement with the policy. Despite my disagreement with the policy, I urged him not to contest his sentence manually. Furthermore, I assured him of my support and pledged to propose to Sherry as soon as I could afford the ring. Things became more complex when Hester learned that Sherry was her mother's personal assistant and that her mother had organized their initial encounter. Prompted Hester to inquire about her mother's stance on the matter. In response, her mother asserted that there was no room for reconciliation on her side. She further elaborated that the situation had been mishandled, and therefore, there was no justification in allowing a promising prospect to be forfeited. Carolyn, in particular, was lauded as an exemplary individual and a valuable friend. She was deemed worthy of a partner who could match her admirable qualities. Reggie, my mother, characterized Hester's cry as tarrying when she retold the story. Both of my children appreciated Sherry's company. In particular, my child appeared to love her maternal demeanor toward me. Sherry had a natural predisposition to meet my wants, making me feel like the master of my kingdom. This, in turn, pushed me to treat her like my queen. I was compelled to treat her like my queen. It was evident that Elise derived pleasure from observing the cordial discourse between Sherry and me. I am uncertain if this behavior was endearing or reprehensible. Nevertheless, I derived enjoyment from being present to witness it. A couple of months later, our sexual intercourse was limited to our 3 children, my parents, and my former spouse. The court clerk who officiated the ceremony expressed surprise when my former mother-in-law was present as a guest. The law stood as Sherry's maid of honor. The story is quite remarkable. I was amused when she inquired, "Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition to come from the classic British comedy ensemble Monty Python's Flying Circus." However, it is also true that nobody expects an inquiry from a federal marshal. I was taken completely by surprise when 2 officials entered my office on a Monday morning. It appeared that the authorities were investigating an altercation and subsequent injury involving a former senator in the restroom of an upscale restaurant in Houston, Texas. My name, along with that of several other attorneys general, emerged as potential suspects. I extend my sympathies to the senator regarding the difficulties he is currently experiencing. I firmly believe that no individual deserves this more than he does. I informed the disgruntled marshals that they should be aware that the individual in question had engaged in an intimate relationship with my then-wife nearly 4 years ago. If I had any intention of taking action, I would have done so long before now. However, the questioning by federal agents was merely the initial phase of the investigation. 1 week later, a reporter from the Associated Press arrived at my office to request information about the aforementioned incident. It appeared that he had somehow obtained a confidential roster of 26 women with whom the senator had allegedly engaged in extramarital affairs during his tenure in office. At this juncture, several individuals were aware of Hester's encounter with the senator. I did not publicize it over the years, but it is likely that Hester disclosed it to more people than I did, as she took pride in her achievement. However, I could not help but wonder about her level of pride when news of the senator's subsequently, evidence of impropriety emerged, implicating her as one of his romantic partners. I was confronted with a series of questions regarding my involvement in this matter. I was asked why I had disclosed this information to him. I informed her that I had not disclosed any information to him. I was also asked why I had confirmed the accuracy of my inclusion on the list. I explained that I had simply confirmed the accuracy of my inclusion on the list. I was not going to fabricate information to spare you. From embarrassment, promiscuous I am not. She screamed at me before I ended the call. I must confess I gave a giggle. I also entertained the thought of taking an extended vacation out of town when the news article broke. She messed up, literally, and yet I was going to suffer an embarrassing fallout as well. Cherry advised me against pursuing that course of action. She recommended that I avoid any confrontation and adhere to the truth. She further suggested that I continue to support my children, despite the verbal bullying they were likely to face at school. We discussed the fact that their mother had been unfaithful to me and had subsequently divorced me. I was also aware that I would be perceived as a cheater for years to come. Furthermore, I empathized with my former in-laws. After the article was published, we invited them to stay with us in our newly purchased house. During their 2-week stay, they mostly remained indoors and avoided answering their phones. I adore my daughter and understand the parental emotions involved. However, I am ashamed that she engaged in promiscuous behavior. My father eventually confessed to the incident. The father desired for his daughter to be perceived in that manner as time elapsed. The scandal dissipated and life resumed its usual course. Gradually, my children began spending more time with Cherry Mo and me at our house. It was not a formal arrangement, but our home naturally evolved into a gathering spot for the neighborhood kids. Initially, Hester objected, but I believe things smoothed over. Furthermore, I ensured Elise and Nate. I maintained open communication with Hester to prevent her from accusing me of alienating her children once more. Mom and Dad's frequent visits helped alleviate tensions when the kids were with me. We seldom discussed Hester, although she remained their mother. She became an ex-wife. In their life, they also refrained from mentioning her out of respect for Sherry, whom they now referred to as Mom. Initially, I sensed discomfort. From Hester's parents, the children began referring to Cherry as Mom, but this soon ceased as they had been close to Cherry even before our marriage. Amidst the upheaval in my life and my family, I paid minimal attention to Hester's affairs. I was aware that she occasionally dated based on the children's remarks, but I was taken aback when Ely announced one afternoon that her mother was engaged. A wave of sadness overwhelmed me. I was then imbued with a sense of solace, and my sorrow swiftly transformed into joy for what I now possessed. I am grateful for the opportunity to recount this narrative. If you found this account engaging, I kindly request that you express your approval by clicking the like button and subscribe to my channel if you have not already done so. Should you have a story to share regarding your or another individual's experience, I encourage you to contact me. I extend my best wishes for your well-being.